Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Law and Legitimacy. Greetings from the swamp, where this week Judge Timothy J. Kelly will sentence 5 of the Proud Boys for their role in the January 6th insurrection. The jury convicted early in May, I guess it was, this year of a number of counts, not all counts, but the counts that mattered. We're down here in D.C. for sentencing this week. Today, the court will rule from the bench, and we're told by his clerk he doesn't want to hear argument. So he'll rule from the bench on our post-trial motions. We're told to expect a lengthy ruling, and then he will entertain argument on selected topics that are common to all of the Proud Boys sentencing. At the end of the day, and then we'll move into the sentencing proceedings tomorrow. Enrique Tarrio will be sentenced tomorrow morning, Ethan Nordine tomorrow afternoon, Zach Rell Thursday morning, Joe Biggs Thursday morning, Zach Rell Thursday afternoon, and at the end, Dominic Pizzola on Friday. Frightening note from him yesterday at Chambers. He's wondering about whether the terrorism enhancement should apply, and if so, to which offense. And you'll recall, if you were listening last week, and if you weren't, you probably don't anyhow, because it's kind of abstruse. But the government is seeking a terrorism enhancement, which would drive these sentences through the roof. And the court is wondering whether they're applicable. And if not, he seems to be looking for other ways to hurt the guys. On the terrorism enhancement, it is sort of a macabre piece of work, and I'll dwell on it for a moment so that those of you who don't have an intuitive grasp of federal sentencing law can understand how arcane it is. So under federal sentencing, there's a base offense level, and then you enhance or adjust based on offense characteristics. There's a terrorism enhancement, and in order to be eligible for that terrorism enhancement, a person has to act to threaten or intimidate or retaliate against the government, and it has to commit a predicate offense, in other words, one of a listed series of offenses, in order to be eligible for the enhancement. There are about 49 offenses listed in the sentencing guidelines, and one of them is destruction of property. Well, lo and behold, the Proud Boys were convicted of destroying government property. In the rush to enter the Capitol, a perimeter fence that was used for crowd control was destroyed. A representative of the architect of the Capitol's office testified that it was going to cost $32,000 to repair that fence. So, okay, that's a predicate offense. They were trying to influence Congress. But you compare this to the other 48 or so predicate offenses: use of a nuclear weapon, assassination of a president, kidnapping a federal official, downing an aircraft, and you begin to think, maybe there's not a very good fit here. Maybe the destruction of a $32,000 fence isn't like kidnapping a member of Congress. And even if destruction of property was meant to be a predicate offense, isn't the destruction of property usually property destroyed to make a political point as opposed to a means to an end? Let's get past this fence to get into the building. So I'm hoping that Judge Kelly has some misgivings about this application of that guideline factor. If he applies it, that makes the Proud Boys eligible for sentences in the 30-plus year range, because its effect on the sentencing guidelines is catastrophic. If he doesn't accept it, the sentencing, the sentences will be a lot lower. The pre-sentence reports that have been prepared thus far suggest sentences in the 10 or so range for the guys. We'll be looking for less. It's likely to be a contentious set of hearings this week. I can't say I'm looking forward to it, but I'm here, and so I'm ready for battle. I woke up this morning and I kept thinking, I kept humming that song, "The Boys Are Back in Town," and so we are, and so
what can you tell me about? I'm going to throw this Gateway Pundit article on the screen. I think you shared this on your X yesterday. What can you tell me about this? This seems like a sort of a glitch in the matrix, as it were.
A what? I didn't hear Mike.
A glitch in the matrix, as it were. What can you tell me about this?
Yeah,
I'm saying a national prayer.
Some of the correspondents for the Gateway Pundit are in touch from time to time, and I get a note with this, and am I able to speak? And if not, will I finally consent to an interview on Friday, because I've been ducking the Gateway Pundit during the trial, at least while the jury was around. And so apparently there's a national day of prayer set for outside the courthouse on Wednesday. And what caught my eye is that Black Lives Matter, at least a former Black Lives Matter person, was going to be there as well. And I think that the sense that I got and what I've learned from talking to people about it is people have misgivings about these proceedings and the extent to which the government is seeking to sentence people to extraordinarily long periods of time for events that were certainly certainly an eyesore. But not so atypical of the American experience that we need to stop the republic and squash these men for all time. And so apparently people from the right and left will be gathering outside of the Pretty Man Courthouse on Wednesday, and they're going to give a prayer, which is basically a version of Pastor Niemeyer's prayer in the Nazi era. First they came for the Proud Boys, then they came for this group, then they came for that, and then they came for me, and there was no one left to defend me. And so I think there's a sense among many in the political world, especially at the extremes, that if you occupy extreme space, if your views are not part of the mainstream, however that mainstream is defined, you're at risk these days. And in this prosecution, the Proud Boys have been characterized as extremists, and the government seeks to designate them as terrorists. Maybe they were just misplaced patriots who on a given day acted and did violate the law in minor ways, but not ways that should require them to spend 10, 20, 30 years behind bars. And so I think this gathering will be a gathering of people who are saying, wait, stop. Let's look at the world and ask ourselves whether this is a disproportionate reaction to something. And, I noted, I don't know how many of you saw Karl Rove's piece in the Wall Street Journal on Saturday. I don't see a lot of hands going up in the chat. But, if you don't read the Wall Street Journal at all, you should read it on the weekend edition. They don't do a Sunday edition. They publish for Saturday and Sunday. They've got one of the best book reviews in print each week, and the weekend review section is quite good. They had an op-ed piece by Rove, and if I had known it was Rove, I might not have read it as carefully as I did, but he wrote a really thoughtful piece. America is often a nation divided. And we live in divided and divisive times now, and we're on the cusp of a 2024 election that's likely to be very fractious and is likely to be even more polarizing. But if you look at the history of violence in American politics, we're remarkably pacific right now. What's violent is our rhetoric, but our conduct doesn't match the rhetoric. And so rather than criminalizing speech, let's try to take a look at what it is that's dividing people. Rather than focusing on the canaries that the coal mine has produced, let's try to figure out what the walls of the coal mine look like so that we can construct a better place in which to live. And so I encourage all of you to look at Rove's piece. I mean, I was reminded that in the 1970s, there were bombings each and every week. In the country, almost daily, sometimes multiple per day, by the Weather Underground and other groups that were registering their domestic dissent rather. We don't have that level of violence these days. We have people angry, we have people speaking out, and if the government's response to speech is going to be prosecution, that's scary. It's scary. So the National Day of Prayer at the Pretty Man Courthouse, if you're in the DC area, come on out tomorrow morning. I'll be curious to see how many people attend.
Cool. Well, how long do you think you'll be there this time, Norm? Last time you were in DC, it took you about 4 months to get home.
4.5, but who is counting? I have reservations on a train at 3:00 on Friday, so I expect to be here for the week. And there's really no reason why these sentencing issues that we have to address this week should take more than a week. Although some of the questions that Kelly gave us last night, I would have appreciated, or yesterday afternoon, learning about days ago, so I would have had adequate time to research them. So the seditious conspiracy, for example, doesn't have a base offense level, so you have to pick an analogous offense. The government, the pre-sentence report author ruled out treason as an analogous offense because treason is the functional equivalent of declaring war on the United States, and that's not what this was. Good thing, because the base offense level for treason is life behind bars. So instead, the PSR authors chose obstruction of justice. Nobody argued that. Judge Kelly yesterday wanted to know whether there was a different analogy. Well, Judge Kelly, it would have been nice to have more than 5 or 6 hours to think about that. So we'll see how much noise gets made about that today, and whether that results in any delay. I don't think it will. I fully expect that by week's end, the Proud Boys will be sentenced, and then we'll be working on our appeal. So.
And just for those that may not be familiar, you represent two of the defendants in this case at this point. You didn't during the trial. You represented the one, Joseph Biggs. Who did you add post trial?
Yeah, so after trial, Zachary Rell asked me to take his sentencing on and to handle his appeal. So we had hearings on whether there'd be a conflict in representing two of the guys. There won't be. So going forward, I will represent Joe Biggs and Zach Rell.
Excellent. Okay. Well, let's move on. We'll have plenty to say about that throughout the week, I'm sure, and interested to see how that prayer goes. I think that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but we'll see how that goes. I think maybe it does at its essence. I think it's perhaps people can kind of find their way to common ground, but an unlikely tandem here outside the courthouse, I think.
I think that's true. I was surprised to see it, and I'll be surprised by what I see tomorrow, I'm sure, whatever it is.
Absolutely. Well, this came through this morning, and I think you were definitely, I call him the Sudanosaurus now.
So we've got two new words, Sudanosaurus, and then I guess the New York Post is talking about maskaholics, people.
Yeah, I like that as well, maskaholic.
On another mask all of a sudden. So what's up with Brand? How many pseudonyms does this guy have?
Well, this is interesting. So I wasn't aware until this article has shown us this morning that the Southeastern Legal Group, I think as it's known, I'll scroll down here just to make sure, Southeastern Legal Foundation, rather. I'll actually put their stuff on the screen in just a moment. But the National Archives was the recipient of a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act request from the Southeastern Legal Foundation. And oddly enough, I think perhaps because of the Southeastern Legal Foundation's perhaps review of of Hunter Biden's laptop, actually made a request, and the request included their ask for emails pertaining to the accounts of one Robin Ware, Robert L. Peters, and J.R.B. Ware, which they allege are pseudonyms that the then vice president was using for email accounts that he was forwarding correspondence to during his vice presidential tenure. And what I believe the National Archives responded with was a letter. And this letter, I'll see if I can blow it up here, said collection for vice presidential records relating to the request and identified approximately 5,138 email messages, 25 electronic files, and 200 pages of potentially responsive records that must be processed in order to respond to your request. So these accounts that have been identified as, and we talked about the Robert L. Peters stuff based on the congressional letter.
Robert L. Peters, a.k.a. Brandon, a.k.a. also known as, Joe Biden.
Yep. And so what I thought was interesting is that number one, New York Post had referenced something that was well over a year old, because this has really just made its way, that the Robert L. Peters pseudonym has really only made its way into the public consciousness in the last couple of weeks, right? But what is clear is that, and I think that this may be why it's making headlines, I'll put this on the screen. Southeastern Legal Foundation yesterday announced that it had filed a federal lawsuit against the National Archives for the emails that it claims to have but will not release. So they've asked for the unredacted emails that they have available pursuant to Robin Ware, Robert L. Peters, and J.R.B. Ware, which they claim has everything to do with the direct and or indirect relationship between Vice President Biden and his son Hunter during Vice President Biden's serving as vice president during the Obama administration. And then perhaps shortly thereafter, because it says dating back to 2017. And this has everything to do with the business dealings. Matthew Kyle says, John B. Ware is a great fantasy football name. Are you claiming dibs, Matt? If so, we'll keep our hands off of it. But I agree, John B. Ware. That's hilarious. I didn't even think about that. Anyway, so the lawsuit is essentially saying now that NARA has responded to the FOIA request, but they are simply unwilling to share any of the emails that they said that they have identified, which is not uncommon. I have found that even at a local level. So it's easy. I think what I'm saying is it's easy to ascribe some sort of intent on the part of NARA to intercede or interfere or slow walk what a lawsuit or a potential party adverse to someone the establishment deems as in favor, to give them records. However, I think it's fairly common, at least in what I do. Local governments or in national governments may be different, but local governments usually don't really have the resources to conduct a well researched or even narrowly tailored FOIA request or public records request at the state level. So it's not uncommon that these sorts of things take longer than they should. What's not very common is that you would have to launch a federal lawsuit to compel that public entity
and it
those
just
records. And well over a year after they responded by letter, identifying, like telling you that they had ascertained this body of information that is related directly to your request, right?
And it just stinks. I mean, he's vice president of the United States. If you're going to send somebody a note, use your own name. I mean, I've always been reluctant to respond even on social media to people who don't use their as my clients call it, their government names on their social media accounts, on the theory is that, if you don't think enough to put your name behind it, why say it? Now I realize people have all sorts of reasons for writing under a pseudonym, and in fact the Federalist Papers were written under a pseudonym, and thus speech is to be honored even even pseudonymously. But if you're elected to a position of high public trust, and you're living on the people's dime, and you're living in one of the people's houses, the vice presidential home, is it too much to ask that if you're going to write somebody, we get to know what you're doing? And it creates a presumption of stink that I don't think that Biden can overcome, especially at a time when there are questions about his son's relationship with the Ukraine and what was going on with Burisma and so on and so forth. You get the impression that Joe was far from sleepy, that Joe was in fact trying to cover his tracks, and the NARA deserves to be sued. I applaud the Freedom Foundation. What, the Southwest Freedom Foundation, was it, Mike? I don't know.
Southeastern Legal Foundation. I'll put
I
that
applaud them. This is a good piece of litigation. I'll be looking them up and maybe contributing to them. You all should too as well. This kind of litigation.
Back on the screen for everybody to see here. Southeastern Legal Foundation. And yeah, perhaps we just dive into the lawsuit a little further. This is stuff that made its way to us way earlier this morning, so not a brick of time to really dive into that. But I think it's interesting, number one, because the National Archives is at the center of the lawsuit against Trump for Mar-a-Lago, right? The classified documents case. So there is some nexus to the National Archives that does not limit itself to Vice President Biden or some sort of impetus to I use the word impeach, not in the legal term of art, but impeach his credibility. And so I think that that's interesting on balance, right? That we have, on one side of the coin, we've got Trump, who is being treated as if, his treatment of material from the White House is somehow, starkly different from how it's been handled in the past with former presidents, and including, the current president, who still has documents in his possession in various places. But then on the other side of the coin, now the Hunter Biden laptop revelation has yet evolved into something that will likely form the basis for direct evidence that not only was he lying when he said that he had no idea that he had, firewalled himself from any of Hunter's business dealings, but that he had, some mens rea sufficient to say that he knew exactly what his son was really peddling in Ukraine through I'm forgetting the name of the oil company.
Burisma, right? Yeah.
Burisma and otherwise. So we'll see how this unfolds, but I'll be interested to see how NARA handles the response to the lawsuit.
Yeah, let's keep an eye on it. That's a good get this morning. All right, so look, let's talk about smart cities, and let's talk about what's going on at the former Travis Air Force Base in Solano County in the San Francisco area in California. If you're out that way, you've probably seen local news coverage of a group called Flannery Associates. This is a group that has for several years been buying land in the Travis Air Force Base area. And breaking news suggests that this land isn't being bought anonymously or for randomly, rather, for no purpose, but as part of a concerted effort to acquire enough real estate to build a city. And who is behind building the city but Mark Andreessen, Reid Hoffman of LinkedIn, the Collinses of Stripe, and other high-tech money. Now, the stated purpose of buying this land is, the land is cheap. We're going to be able to put in some housing. We're going to be able to have employees for Silicon Valley. But here's my prediction. These high-tech investors are not just interested in employees and housing, but they want to build a smart city. And so I think it's time for us to start talking about what smart cities are and whether we want to live in smart cities. There was a story not long ago about a city in China who, using the Internet of Things, that is the ability of devices to communicate with one another, re-engineered its traffic control system in the city such that if an ambulance were on its way to a hospital, all of the stoplights in the city would be adjusted such that the ambulance could make it to the hospital emergency room a minute or two or 3 or 4 earlier than it would otherwise have done so, because the smart device would coordinate the activity of the millions of people living in that town such that this could be prioritized. And so in the battle to save this life, the life of the occupant of the ambulance, everyone else's movement potentially would be affected. Now, that sounds great in a way, doesn't it? It sounds humanitarian, and it's like, yeah, we're going to do anything to save a life. But suppose the person in the ambulance was my age and hadn't taken care of themselves and was living a dissolute life, which I don't think I am. But suppose that person were on the cusp of death, and the result was that 35 other people were made to be late for places they had to be, that a school class had to be canceled, that deliveries were not on time for things that were expected because of the cascading effect of manipulating traffic patterns. Suddenly, everybody else is feeling a little bit discomfited. And if you're in a city of millions upon millions of people, there are going to be many ambulance runs per day. Do you want to create a gridlock in traffic every time an ambulance goes by? That's a choice that somebody gets to make. And I could see arguing it in a number of different ways. And I'm not going to take a position on what the correct answer is. But I want to focus on the fact that it's a question you get to pose. And in a smart city, it's an answer someone gets to give. And the someone who gets to give that answer is the person who controls and designs the algorithm. So in the algorithm that places a value on getting an ambulance to the hospital as quickly as possible, no matter how many ambulances travel, no matter who the occupant is, no matter what day of the week, no matter what else is going on in the city will in effect be frozen to get the ambulance to the hospital. That's a choice you can make, but it's a value-laden choice that weighs other factors and concludes that saving of life in that instance is the most important factor. In a smart city is really just a company town. We've had those in mining towns where when you went out to work at the mine, the mine owned your home, the mine owned the country store, you gave credits to the country store, and before you know it, you weren't just an employee of the company, you were in effect a piece of the company's property. Your very livelihood and the manner in which you live and how you lived, where you lived, what you ate, how you paid for it.
So much meaningful history to be, I think, remembered. What you're talking about right now with the mining towns in West Virginia in particular, that's exactly where my mind went when I began reading the story, because you sent this to me this morning, and the first thing I thought of was the coal mining towns that were set up, and they were self-contained. They essentially subverted all of constitutional law, right, in favor of their sort of pseudo incorporation and total market capture of all of the inputs and outputs for those that live there. right, and
And
work
I
with
think,
minds.
and that to me is what's interesting about this Solana County venture, is because I predict that these high tech folks are going to build a smart city where everything is connected, and then they're going to say, "Come live here." To folks, and some will say, "Hey, great, everything's going to be taken care of. My air conditioning will be set for me. I don't have to worry about the thermostat. Food will be delivered on time. In fact, it'll be healthful food. And if I follow the app, I'll know how many calories to eat each day, and I'll even be given directions on when to walk. And perhaps everybody will be given the same 45 minutes off for their daily exercise. And the result will be what? You'll be living on an ant farm." But you'll be a happy ant.
Well,
And
it represents sort of a feudal kingdom in the making here, because we're talking about, the thinking about the sort of from a development perspective, why this area makes the most sense. So, Travis Air Force Base is mentioned. It's at the Travis Air Force Base. If you're looking on the screen here, is just southeast of Fairfield near Creed. So this is a lot of really open farmland, very rural in nature. By contrast to Sacramento, which is the capital of California, to the northeast, and then San Francisco, which is Kingdom, Silicon Valley, um, Mecca, to the southwest. And when we think about, I guess, sort of the Internet of, there is no better better suited and better situated uh, money and resources and competence and technical know-how than sits right here. And so from where I'm sitting, it's almost as if we are watching a second wave, or I don't know how many waves there'll be historically, but sort of the medieval ages and the feudal kingdoms that one can open a textbook and read about from way back, hundreds of years ago. Um, the one thing that was perhaps missing from those lords' ability to create some sort of permanence within that structure and power is the technology that is now wielded by those in the position of the Andreessens and others, right? Who
well,
are
let's talk about
investing
that
in this.
technology. I don't know if you happened to see the story the other day, but there is some discussion now of being able to have a microchip implanted on you, and that microchip would contain your financial information, so that when you went to the store, you could have a scan, whether it be a retinal scan or something else, or the chip would be scanned, and your accounts would automatically be debited or credited, depending on the nature of the transaction you're involved in. And so some people are saying, this is great, cashless society. I won't have to have a wallet. I won't have to do this. I won't have to do that. But what you'll lose is the ability to opt in and out of the market at choice, because the person who controls the chip can decide that you can't purchase something. Or in an era where in social justice, equity is the norm, and we want to make sure that everybody arrives at the same place, regardless of where they started, who they are, or what they've done, we can decide that based on your immutable characteristics, you pay more for milk rather than somebody else who will pay less, because social justice requires that we redistribute income in that direction. So the Internet of Things, smart cities, big data, algorithmic control of our lives, it always sounds good in theory that we can live happily ever after together, but we'll be living happily ever after together according to rules that are set by creators of the algorithm. And I think people need to think critically about this.
I agree. So
So this business
one thing
about a
I want
new
to talk about
city in
real quick.
Solano County out in California.
Are you there,
I
Norm?
lost you, Mike.
Yeah, you were
Yeah.
cutting out a little bit there,
Hello.
but yeah, you can hear me. I want to put this on the screen. I sent this to you. Did you get a chance to read this fifth grade
Yeah,
level
it's creepy.
article?
Yeah,
It's
tell
very
people
creepy,
about that.
right? So I want to share this quickly because I know you also have a a fairly hard out here. I don't want to say semi-hard because that sounds odd, doesn't it? So this is from the
Sounds like
National.
sounds like a 60-something-year-old guy. Yeah.
So I got curious this morning, just as I'm reading the article. I said, I wonder, it's hard for me to remember how the phrase smart city came into my mind. And so I just thought, okay, what is a smart city? And I threw that into the search bar. And this article from National Geographic's education resources came up. And you can see here that it's a fifth to eighth grade reading level. And it talks about, what a smart city is and sort of the mandate of a smart city. So it does talk about the Internet of Things, and it talks about sort of a suite of sensors that are enabled and deployed via technology, et cetera. And it talks about smart, quote unquote, smart transportation, in particular, smart toll roads, how cars and vehicles could be charged at stoplights and stuff like that. But then it really gets into, it sort of buries the big one here, which is autonomous driverless vehicles, and I think what it calls platooning, where multiple autonomous vehicles could ride together. And I think we lost Norm. I knew his internet connection was suffering. I'll keep talking here for a moment. Maybe he'll join back in. But platooning, and that's because that they could be driven closer together in coordination in a manner that is not necessarily possible with human drivers for obvious reasons. And then what struck me as well was the appeal to smart energy. And again, remember, this is written and I guess proposed for students between fifth and eighth grade, so middle school age children. And what struck me about this article, and what I found rather sinister, is this sort of really dense and layered appeal to collectivization rather than personal autonomy and liberty. And when it got to smart energy, it talked about electric with almost no reference to anything else, as if electric was the only source of energy. And in particular, I want to read this paragraph. In addition to control of the house's electricity, control of the house's electricity can be handled easily from a centralized location without requiring a utility crew to go out to turn it on or off. Smart meters can also allow for differential rate provisioning. That is, a consumer can be charged more for higher usage during peak hours, and because the user has more timely access to his or her electric use, may be able to adjust that use accordingly. So now we're talking about behavioral control, right? And that's not explicitly stated in this article, but that is the entire thing, right? This article is designed to almost make normal these concepts of collectivization. And Jackie, when you made the comment earlier that it's very similar to a prison environment, that an occurrence in one part of the prison will determine what happens in other parts of the prison, just from a security and lockdown and control perspective. I wanted to bring this up, and I'll have to end this because I know Norm, maybe the algorithm betters got him pushed off this morning. Is likely just a faulty internet connection there and wherever he's staying in DC. But I wanted to bring this up because I thought that it would be interesting for us to discuss at a later date the fact that Norm was saying, some people ostensibly will live here. Well, who is the question? And ultimately, if we have a larger congregate of those of, we'll call it 30s to 60s, 70s maybe age, and we are generally averse to subverting our own individual liberty and interests and freedom of movement, commerce, etc., in exchange for whatever this smart cities might provide. The question then becomes, well, are younger generations being programmed to accept this as the norm? Are they being deprogrammed from something such as the Bill of Rights in our modern Constitution? So anyway, I won't belabor that. I think this is all really good stuff, food for thought. And one of the first examples, I think, of a notable investment in building a smart city on American soil that should at least gain and garner the attention of those that care to at least look at this county in California as sort of a litmus test of what arguments and strategies and tactics are deployed by those with the resources and means to deploy them, i.e., the developers that are looking to actually, enforce and bring about and manifest their desired build, and what sorts of implementations will come with that desired build, and perhaps what legally they're using in order to gain the favor of the county board of adjustment or the zoning board, whomever it is, the planning board, as well as the council. And I'm assuming that this is something that I think they've already put over $1 billion in resources into this, and just accumulating and going through these early processes, I assume that this battle is likely lost for those that are in the county there that don't want to see this come to fruition. But it is something that we should put a magnifying glass over here on Law and Legitimacy, because I happen to, in my professional career, work in a little bit of the commercial development realm, and I can help peel back some of the layers as to the legal standards, what the public has a right to know, how the public makes its voice heard, and ultimately how these boards are making decisions as to infrastructure, allocation of resources, et cetera. Because this is also all balanced on the spectrum of property rights. We can't forget that. So anyway, I will close this up for today. Those of you who have signed up for Law and Legitimacy, you will get an email today. So we're going to be starting that up this week. You'll be getting an email into the league. So please get into the league, get your league name established in there and set up. We will set a draft date, and I think we're about just under a week really from the regular season starting on September 7th. I believe that's a Thursday. So anyway, Norm and I both appreciate everybody being here. Thank you for hanging with me while Norm goes in and out of internet consciousness. We'll be back tomorrow, 8 a.m. You know where to find us here on Rumble Video, YouTube Live, and live on X at LawPod Daily. Please give us a follow over there. We reached our goal of 500 followers over the weekend, so we'll be unlocking subscriptions in the short term and giving you a little additional content behind a very modest paywall, but really looking to build more into the X platform. So please give us a follow over there. If you don't care or you don't really care for the video portion, I'm not handsome enough for you, although I can't imagine that being the case. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Overcast, wherever you find podcasts, iHeartRadio as well. Please leave us 5 stars, and if you're willing to, leave a positive review or leave us alone. For Norm Pattis, I am Michael Boyer. We are Law and Legitimacy. We will see you tomorrow.